the opportunity, for the invitation. I feel greatly honored and privileged to have been asked to share with you my perspective of Europe's role in the world, with a particular focus on employment and social affairs, the social dimension, and on a day which will discuss Europe's doorstep. But before speaking concretely some of the regions which can be defined as Europe's doorstep, let me elaborate a little bit about the global outlook. Also because this is very important, and also because this defines the context for Europe's relation with its immediate neighborhood. Just a few points to start with. First of all, I would like to underline that globalization, which is the main story and context for the last few decades, created many challenges, but also opportunities for all the macro regions and the strategic blocks of the world economy. The crisis of the recent years, however, exposed major weaknesses, and particularly in the OECD world. In many countries, the crisis has accentuated a wide variety of structural weaknesses resulting from demographic aging, overdependence on particular resources and energy, malfunctioning education systems, the lack of proper social protection, flaws, inequality, and so on and so forth. Second, and linked to my first point, I'd like to stress that the financial meltdown that followed the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 and the resulting global crisis have helped to realize that economies are hugely interdependent and fragile to the gaps in each other's finances and economies. And likewise, some major critical situations also with impact on the global economy and the geopolitical power equations, such as developments like the Arab Spring. These are also reminders of how interconnected our world has become. And the third point I want to make in introduction is that the increased level of public awareness of globalization and its adverse effects resulted in a new situation in which civil society movements became more capable of influencing the national but also the global policy agenda by drawing attention to their messages of jobs, justice, or climate change. In this sense of renewed global interdependence, I think it's very important to look at how the world responded to the crisis of 2008 and what it followed. The most important development I would like to highlight, because it has a relevance for the social dimension, is the rise of the Group of 20, which was co-initiated by the European Union in 2008. This group brings together the 20 most important advanced and emerging economies from all corners of the world. At their summit in 2009 in Pittsburgh, the G20 leaders affirmed the group's role as the world's main economic policy forum. And what is more, they also confirmed that employment and poverty reduction must be at the center of national and worldwide economic strategies. Since 2010, the labor and employment ministers of the G20 countries meet every year to discuss common challenges and recommend actions. This year's meeting, held under the Mexican G20 presidency, was centered on youth unemployment, which is a perilous issue in all major economies. The tripartite organization of governments, business, and trade unions, the ILO, achieved a center stage in this process. To Mexico, I brought the strong message of the EU that we immediately need an alternative approach as compared to the past year's austerity. We need a new job-centered approach with investment, which is based on coordinated macroeconomic employment and social protection policies. The G20 leaders who met in Los Cabos earlier this week approved much of our recommendations on poverty eradication, boosting youth employment, increasing female participation in the labor market, as well as on social security reforms, including the importance of establishing nationally defined social protection floors, and many other areas such as skills development, training, and childcare. We also have developed in the recent period concrete cooperation projects with international organizations like the ILO or the OECD to pool knowledge and resources, adding value to our policy approach and increase policy coherence, if not convergence, of certain policies. This is especially the case in areas where we need innovative solutions to complex challenges, for example, the impact of the greening of the economy on skills and decent working conditions. Social policy, and in particular social protection, increasingly forms part of the development policy. In response to increasing demand from our partners, the Commission is involved in a number of initiatives supporting social protection in all developing regions, often in collaboration with other actors such as the ILO, the OECD, the United Nations, UNICEF, or the World Bank. These range from small-scale pilot transfer schemes to the elaboration and reform of comprehensive national social protection systems. While our discussion is taking place here, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Brazil is drawing to an end, hopefully with the broad agreement that eradicating poverty is the greatest global challenge, and the world's sustainable development agenda should be underpinned by a robust set of commitments by governments to pursue decent work and affordable social protection, to boost job creation and guarantee fundamental rights at work and the social dialogue. But also beyond development policy, over the years, we have been strengthening social development through a progressive trade system based on cooperation, transparency, and dialogue. And I should also add that cooperations, for example, on corporate social responsibility, on which the Commission adopted a communication last October, are also playing a role, especially in interaction with the private sector. Now, having a look at the global developments of the recent years and these days, let me now come to the immediate doorstep. And then I would like to focus on three regions: the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership, and the Arab Spring. Concerning the Western Balkans, I think it's very important to highlight that there is and there should be an ever stronger link between the concept of the Western Balkans as a geographical region and the concept of EU enlargement. However, the situation is complex, partly because the legacy of the military conflicts of the 1990s is still visible on the economy, on politics, but also the social and the cultural area. And the rapid political and economic transformation of the 1990s and the later years was very often not accompanied with adequate social guarantees. In the Western Balkans, the EU is engaging with authorities and civil society, but also with other international organizations such as the ILO and the World Bank, to enhance representativeness and capacities of the social partners, strengthening the social dialogue and other parts of the decent work agenda, including workers' rights. We also have a clear political commitment with financing capacity for actions to improve the living and working conditions of the nearly 4 million Roma people living in the Western Balkans and Turkey, who are facing even more serious problems of marginalization than Roma communities in many EU countries. But in general, the dissemination of the European social acquis and the efficient use of pre-accession assistance in these countries is a clear catalyzer for promoting smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth in the EU's doorsteps. Smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth are the key pillars of the Europe 2020 strategy, and indeed these countries which participate in the enlargement process, they also participate in the Europe 2020 strategy. Concerning the countries of the CIS, those closest to the borders of the EU. While the Eastern Partnership countries are at a different level of advancement in the relations with the EU as compared to some countries in the Western Balkans, they all experience difficulties with the implementation of freedom of association, workers' rights, and social dialogue. And is it not ironic that it took a European football tournament to notice that there are indeed some major problems what concerns political rights, the rule of law, or racism in some of the countries we speak about? Therefore, the Commission's new roadmap, which was adopted a month ago, and sets out actions until the next Eastern Partnership Summit in 2013, contains many concrete actions to remove such difficulties. It aims, for example, for more dialogue on labour market and social policies with a view to promote exchanges on employment, social protection and social inclusion policies involving public services and social partners as stakeholders. All these efforts are geared towards accelerating political association and deepening economic integration between the EU and the Eastern European partner countries. And the more a partner country makes progress, the more support it will receive from the EU. And let me just make one connection between the Eastern relations and the global agenda, that next year it will be Russia chairing the G20, and obviously this will be an opportunity in many areas to strengthen the dialogue and also the relations. Now, concerning the South Mediterranean, in response to the political developments in Tunisia and Egypt in early 2011, I'm sure you know the Commission adopted a strategic response on the 8th of March, and the Commission's swift political support for the transition was demonstrated by a series of high-level visits, and EU financial instruments have also been mobilized to respond to the new challenges. Considerable humanitarian support has also been made available, in particular to help Tunisia to cope with the influx of refugees fleeing the war in Libya. And an EU-Tunisia task force, the first one in the region, has been set up in order to ensure better coordination of European and international support for Tunisia's political and economic transition. Concerning the South Mediterranean region, job creation, training, social dialogue are among the priority actions. However, when we looked at the causes of the political upheaval of last year, it was not that difficult to point out that many young people who were relatively well trained and had university degrees did not find their way to the labor market, to good economic opportunities. So the lack of an inclusive economic development was a major factor, and we have to help these countries to develop a new model of economic growth for themselves. But at this point, I would also like to underline the importance of ownership and the need to avoid some of the mistakes which were committed beforehand in the 1990s in the Eastern region. We discussed this aspect a lot 1 year ago, especially because the colleague who's responsible for the neighborhood policy is Stefan Füle, also coming from a country that went through post-communist transformation in the 1990s. So it was an interesting question for us whether the experience and lessons of the Eastern transformation can be used in the Mediterranean context. I stress again that we can learn lessons. Of course, it would be foolish to assume that historic events can repeat themselves in a different geopolitical and cultural context, but we have also seen that some of the institutions that were developed to help the transition in the East can also be useful to help the transition in the Mediterranean, particularly the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is a financial institution, but with a political mandate. to also help developing the transparency of the economy and to promote equal opportunities. So all this experience from the East can be helpful in the southern Mediterranean context. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, this is just a snapshot of our main fields of action to externalize EU values, and especially of those directly linked to social conditions and human capital. But I consider this as a two-way process, whereby we are not only exporting our values, but we also can learn how to improve our own models, including the European social model, which is perhaps more than before a model for the rest of the world. Since World War II, Europe's social model has allowed generations to grow up safe in the knowledge that they would be better off than their parents. Against today's economic background, this premise is not at all obvious. We have to do our utmost to restore the EU's potential to deliver to its citizens according to their social expectations and aspirations. However, the point today is that the fundamental values and institutions of the European social model are not only important for Europe. Europe's interactions with the rest of the world have to ensure that our social model can be preserved and further modernized, and also that the progressive elements of the European social model are promoted among our strategic partners and in our neighborhood. Therefore, the European Commission strongly supports the efforts at the G20 level and other international fora to strengthen the social dimension of globalization, and in particular to foster youth employment, eradicate poverty, and ensure adequate social protection. The more decision makers, professionals, intellectuals, and interested members of the public embrace this idea, the better it will be. That's also why I appreciate very much that FEPS put this topic on its today's agenda, and thank you very much for your attention.